Good afternoon again. So we're back in the studio to listen to some of the large number of concertos that we heard, 10 altogether. Not a great deal of choice between them, of course, but one of the famous ones, at least from my boyhood, I suppose, was what's known as the Elvira Madigan Concerto, which is number 21 in C major. Now, it's quite an interesting story, and if you are sort of galvanised into wondering why this music was so appropriate, I remember it being one of the first films that actually used classical music in the way that we've come to become terribly familiar with it in a film. This was in 1967, and I remember it causing such a furore of adoration, because it's a very pastoral and rather sanitised, romanticised view of a particularly tragic story that took place in a sort of tragic environment. We don't really know much about where it was or what it was or anything else. But of course this is not important in a romantic love story. But basically it was what's known as a slack rope walker. Her name was Elvira Madigan. And basically a rather reprobate military officer fell madly in love with her and decided that he wanted to seduce her. And she was very much younger than him. And he used every trick in the book, if you like. And she never really fell deeply in love with him. But at the end, they decided on a mutual suicide pact. And so the whole story became very symbolic of romantic love and death, the sort of thing that Wagner dealt with. But we're going to listen to a number of people playing this and also the A major concerto, and then a few excerpts from the recitals that actually preceded this. So first of all, Leonardo Piadomenico will play part of the first movement of this C major concerto, the one I was talking about with the film, although this part of the music didn't appear in it. Yes, it's very charmingly played too. The actual film was made in Denmark in the countryside, but of course this part of it didn't feature at all. This first movement. Just an overall comment concerning these Mozart concertos, not simply Leonardo, but everybody. They tend to lack the playfulness and the humour of Mozart, particularly the playfulness and affectation of Vienna at the turn of the century, the late 18th century. And I think that it's possible to take Mozart too seriously, if you can catch my meaning. I mean, the D minor concerto is a very serious and tragic work, but many of the others are blithe. I think that blithe is the adjective that describes the general mood of these. Sergei Belyavsky is in the final, and he is going to play now the beautifully moving and quite tragic, I think, Adagio from the A major concerto. 488, and he brings to it a side of melancholy, I think, which is very affecting. I mean, the thing with these adagios of Mozart were that really they are opera arias, you know. And it's another thing I felt missing slightly from a lot of these performances was the knowledge of Mozart as an opera composer, because so much of Mozart are opera arias without voice. And I think you really do have to sing the melodies in your mind to get the phrasing correct. Anyway, Paderewski was very, very moving in this particular work, so let's listen to the Adagio. This particular movement is deeply, deeply introspective, I think. And it's as if a soprano or opera singer was lamenting. It's a type of lament. And I think that if you play it like this, it's very beautiful. I think Paderewski touched something there. The other thing which is very good about the competition, of course, we've got a Polish pianist in the final, Kamil Pakolec, and he was such a marvellous development, if I remember correctly. I heard him some years ago in Dłużniki Zdrój, and how he has developed since then. If you've been listening online, you will have noticed all this, of course. So let's listen to the Andante then. That's the Elvira Madigan's piece of music from the C major concerto, the way he played it, which I thought was very extremely sensitive. His phrasing and nuance was very, very cultured, and also the colour of sound that he was producing. Very beautiful interpretation. Yes, it's the entry. His entry is so subtle, and to that repeated left hand, just to get the right dynamic so that it doesn't intrude, particularly on a modern instrument, is really not terribly easy. I heard him play very effectively on the early instruments in the first Chopin piano competition for period instruments, which was last year. And I think that students can learn a great deal about the colour of previous composers and the registral changes by playing, not building their career, but playing an early piano. You can learn a great deal. Right, let's move on to Chen. Juan Hong, I think you pronounce it, or Sui Hong. It's very difficult, these names, I'm afraid, for me. Chen wasn't in the final, but I was very impressed with a couple of things that he did during the concerto stage. One was his cadenzas, and you have to think to yourself, what is a cadenza exactly? What's the function of it? Well, the function of it was purely to the soloist to be able to show his great inventive ability as a soloist. And the orchestra listened to him, the audience listened, and the conductor listened, of course. And it was a way to show. And of course, one of the great quizzes is to spy the cadenza in all of these concertos, and it became increasingly difficult for me to have any idea who produced them. But the way Chen approached this was that the cadenza enters as a cadenza. That's my turn to show myself. And after that, I'd like to play a little bit of him playing the Andante again from this film about this tragic and rather blighted love story. So let's listen to that. Yes, well, you see, you may not be able to hear this online, but if you replay your online recording of this, it was the dynamic that he brought in the cadenza. It was far above the normal cadenza's entries, which are generally much the same dynamic as the movement that has preceded them. But he gave it the full Monty, you might say. I'd also like to hear him because I think Chen's great strength was in cantabile and playing cantilena. He was able to produce a beautiful rounded tone, a sensitive legato, and a beautiful rubato. We can hear this in the Andante, again, of our love story film. One of the, I think, strong candidates in the final is the Japanese lady Yasuko Fuyumi. And I mean, I was reading through my previous notes on her playing, and in just about every area she appeared to me rather outstanding. We won't hear, we'll hear one piece of hers which is not a concerto, but a little bit later. This is the final allegro from the C major concerto, number 21. And what I liked about this was the sort of energy and exuberance and verve she brought to it. Because these final movements of Mozart's concertos are generally rondos, and they're not to be considered too seriously. I mean, they're like conversations between civilized people. And someone says this, and then someone says that, and then the orchestra says this, and then the soloist replies that. And it's all very delightful. And of course, in a competition situation, it's not particularly delightful at all, because you're playing against your own talents, you've got to express them, and all of the other competitors. So you're not really thinking of fin de siècle Vienna, are you? However, this maintained some of the joyfulness of that rather affected and happy, playful period. Thank you. See, what's so wonderful about that sound is that just the slight détaché, you know, where it's sort of demi-staccato and there's hardly any pedal being used at all. And you get this sort of feeling of a polished piece of porcelain, you know, a beautiful piece of Meissen or something like that. And it's so elegant. But from my point of view, it just misses slightly the opera aspect, you know, like that would probably be at the end of a Mozart opera. There's always a chorus between a group of people and joyfulness, and the king is very thoughtful towards the condemned man and forgives him everything and all that sort of thing. And of course, there's music behind that, and I think that's how you have to think when you're playing these works. Well, a little bit more seriously, just to finish the concerto phase today, the Andante, this time by Sejbol Kim, who was from South Korea. She's a very intense player, and I think puts a great deal of emotional content into her playing, and this is evident from the Andante, again, of the C major. Yes, she brings a very heartfelt yearning into this, which of course suits this ghastly story. But I suggest you look up two things on Wikipedia. One is Elvira Madigan, the film, and the other is The True Story of Elvira Madigan, both of which are available. And you will approach the listening of this piece in a completely different way. All right, we move on to a little bit of some excerpts from the recital stage, and I'd like to go back to Yasuko Furumi. She played the rather seldom played Sonata in F minor, number 3. This is Schumann's Opus 14. And of course, it's as customary with Schumann at this time in his life, all his compositions, even the little cryptograms that were built into them, are to do with this enforced separation from Clara Wieck by her father. And again, his passions rise and fall, and in this particular sonata there's a wonderful set of variations based on a melody by Clara Wieck, because she was such a wonderful composer, and God had given her a wonderful melodic gift. She was an extraordinarily talented woman, and I can quite see why Schumann may have fallen in love with her. So let's listen to the beginning of this sonata with Yasuko Furumi. If I remember correctly, Schumann referred to this piece as a orchestral sonata for the piano, and certainly you can hear his vision as an orchestral writing. It's a very extraordinarily demanding and grand work, wonderful work, and I think that she penetrated it very successfully. I've always been very interested in this young man from Ukraine, Ilya Ovcharenko, partly because of his youth. He's only about 18. And I'd like to play a little. He played a very, very good Liszt B minor sonata, which, when you think of it, I can't even imagine. I managed to play some Scarlatti sonatas at the age of 9, if I remember, and the Minute Waltz, if I remember. But that's the extent of my great talents. Let's listen to a bit of the fugato, the entry of the fugato, because it's such a marvellous part of this Liszt B minor sonata, played by Ilya Ovcharenko. it's just a pity we have to listen to excerpts like this, but his performance was highly emotional, quite galvanic in many ways. Such a naturally musical, gifted musician. Marvellous. Finally, in our little session today, chatting away, Kiseleva, Daria played, I think, a far superior work in many ways, constructively and structurally, to Rachmaninoff's variations on the Chopin Prelude. This is his variations on Corelli's La Folia. Now, of course, Corelli didn't write La Folia. La Folia was rather an ancient melody, which just about everybody wrote variations on, and I'm sure you've heard it many, many times. But Rachmaninoff wrote, I think, a marvellous, coherent set of variations on La Folia. And Daria played this very well. She began in a rather dark, haunted almost way, which of course La Folia itself, the theme, carries with it emotional baggage. It's not just a tune that people wrote variations on. So let's listen to the beginning, shall we, of Daria Kiseleva's Rachmaninoff's variations on La Folia. I think her transition from the bare melody of La Folia into the first variation is deeply emotional and very moving emotionally, and it sets the tone for this whole marvellous set of variations. Right, well, this evening, I'm not, as Richard Strauss once said after a marathon conducting session, off to the races, but I am off to the finals of the competition, which will be over 2 nights, 5 concertos. I think we're listening to 3 concertos tonight, and I really hope you're able to watch this online, because it's the creme de la creme of this particular competition, which you must remember is the second most important competition in Poland, next to the great international Chopin competition in Warsaw every 5 years. This one only occurs every 3 years. So take the opportunity to watch some magnificent playing this evening. Okay, see you tomorrow perhaps. Bye-bye.